The breathing in the barn wasn't an animal's. It was wet and slow, and it came from a thing the size of a delivery truck, a thing wearing the faces of every creature I had killed that week. And it had just noticed me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning it started, before I understood that some things don't stay buried just because you dig the hole deep enough. Scene: the morning we put down Clementine. That morning, we put Clementine down. I hated the captive bolt gun. I hated the weight of it in my hands, the cold mechanical click of it, the way the whole world narrowed down to one small patch of forehead between two trusting brown eyes. But it was part of the job. After 23 years, I had more experience than anyone left on the place. I'd come here as a young hothead, zero experience, way too much attitude, the kind of kid who thought he already knew everything. It didn't take them long to break me in, the way you break a horse. The real old-timers taught me everything. How to be a proper hand. How to fix anything that rusted or snapped or wore out. How to take care of the animals, day in and day out, in the heat and the cold and the long gray rain. The dairy had exactly 179 cows. 13 horses. 6 dogs that followed us around like shadows. More cats than anybody had ever bothered to count, a flock of chickens, and 25 pigs that knew their own names better than some children do. The owner was old Mr. Hale, or really his sons by now. The old man only came around once in a while to see how things were running. And that morning, after Clementine, I didn't have a single good thing to tell him. "Joseph," old Mr. Hale said, patting my shoulder with that dry, papery hand of his. "You've put down plenty of cows before. Don't hang your head." "Sure, Mr. Hale," I said, and my voice came out flat and far away. "But I've seen a lot of things on this farm. And Clementine. I don't know what that sore on her was." He waved it off from behind his massive, ancient wooden desk, the one that had been there longer than I had. He fished a cigarette out of his shirt pocket. "She was probably just old, Joseph," he said, and took a long, slow drag. The smoke curled up into the dusty light coming through the blinds. "No point painting the devil on the wall. You take her up to the hill." I nodded. I hated the hill, too. I'd hauled more carcasses up that slope over the years than I could count. Cows. Horses. Every piece of livestock that ever got sick or broke a leg or simply lay down one night and didn't get up. The hill knew my footsteps better than my own porch did. "You seen my boy today?" the old man asked, puffing away. "The older one's in town, sir," I said, snapping to it like a soldier. "Said this morning he had something to take care of. Haven't seen the younger one anywhere." "Humph. It's already noon." He frowned at the smoke. "If you see Travis, tell him I'm looking for him." I nodded, turned, and walked out. I knew old Mr. Hale well enough by then to know the real reason he hid in that office. His wife wouldn't let him smoke in the house, so he'd come out here and sneak them like a teenager. It was almost sweet. It was almost normal. It was the last almost normal thing I'd feel for a long, long time. Seeing the heat and the warning, I stood on the front porch of the main house and let the summer heat lean against me like a hand. Working in that kind of heat was hard enough on a good day, and this hadn't been a good day. The morning had started badly, and it had already thrown a long shadow across everything that was supposed to come after it. In the distance I watched Duke. He was the only horse still out at that hour, a big gray with a temper. Poor thing had to graze alone in the far pasture, but that was his own doing. He got aggressive with the others, so it was safer to keep him by himself. He stood there flicking his tail at the flies, and there was nothing wrong with him at all. I want you to remember that. There was nothing wrong with Duke that morning. Joseph. A voice snapped me out of it. One of the new boys. Couldn't have been more than 20. His sunburned face made his pale blue eyes stand out like chips of sky, and right now those eyes were wide and nervous in a way I didn't like. Joseph, he said again, jogging up to me. Danny, his name was. Good kid. Soft, but good. I adjusted my hat and started toward him before he passed out in the sun. What is it, kid? What happened? Boss. Danny said, almost whispering, like he didn't want the words to be true if he said them quietly enough. Lonnie found a few more. Found what? More cows. With sores. That's impossible, I snapped, and I meant it. I checked every one of them this morning. Other than Clementine, there wasn't a mark on a single animal in this place. He just shrugged, that anxious fear stuck to his face like sweat. And something cold moved through me despite the heat. Show me, I said. Scene, barn 3, they were in barn 3. A few of the other hands had already gathered at the fence, staring in like it was some kind of sideshow. Danny cleared a path and we made it up to the rail of the pen. Most of the cows had backed themselves up against the walls. They were lowing, the way they always do, but this time it was different. This time it sounded like fear. Like they were trying to get as far from something as the walls would let them. And 3 of them, 3, stood apart from the herd. Large red patches, each one the size of a man's palm, covered their flanks and their backs. The patches oozed. A thick yellow pus ran down their sides and dripped, slow as honey, into the straw. Jesus Christ, I muttered. The others just stared and murmured among themselves, and not one of them said out loud what we were all thinking. What this turns into if you don't move fast. What it cost us the last time. All right. I shouted, and my voice cracked the silence like a whip. Everybody back to work. There's plenty to do. Nobody argued. I was the senior hand, and most days they listened to me. They scattered, throwing glances back over their shoulders. I grabbed Danny by the arm. You're coming with me. He swallowed so hard I heard it. I could see he'd rather have vanished with the others, but he didn't argue either. He just nodded, pale and miserable. I had another trip up the hill ahead of me. I didn't know yet how many more were coming. Scene, the first killing, the kid had never seen a captive bolt gun do its work before. He stood there white as a bedsheet beside the first cow, watching her legs kick at nothing, watching the blood come, and the only thing that saved him from collapsing right there was Reyes pulling up with the loader. Reyes had come to the farm 3 or 4 years after me. By now he was steady, experienced, the man I always wanted with me for jobs like this. You okay, kid? Reyes asked Danny, who was somehow getting paler. Danny didn't answer. When the pool of blood reached the toes of his boots, he turned and bolted for the bushes. Ha, Reyes chuckled, climbing into the cab. I remember puking my guts out at my first calf birth. He'll be fine. I didn't laugh. I stood over the 3 of them lying in the dust, their muscles still twitching now and again, blood running thin and dark from their foreheads, the yellow fluid still seeping from those swollen sores even in death. For cows had these marks today, I said quietly. This isn't going to end well, Reyes. Ah, don't start. He waved a hand at me. We've seen this before. There was a year we put down the whole herd, you remember. And we're still standing. I did remember. 12, maybe 15 years back. Foot and mouth. We slaughtered every animal on the property, buried them in long mass graves, and burned them. The smell of it stayed in my dreams for years. The piles. The black smoke that wouldn't stop rising. Nobody should ever have to see something like that. Nobody. This feels different, I said. Stop it, Joseph. Reyes's voice went hard. Nothing's going to happen. We wake up tomorrow, everything's back to normal. I nodded because it was easier than arguing. Danny came stumbling back from the bushes, wiping his mouth. And I couldn't take my eyes off those sores, the way they still seemed to pulse faintly, like something underneath was breathing. We hauled the three of them up the hill and buried them deep. I sent Danny back to help with the afternoon feeding. He didn't belong on that hill, and honestly, neither did I. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, not a person, but a place? Tell me in the comments, because standing on that hill that afternoon, I swear the ground itself was paying attention. Scene, the night it spread, by evening I was wrung out, hollow, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. I collapsed into bed and waited for sleep that wouldn't come. All I could think about were those sores. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe Reyes was right. But there was a cold finger pressed against the back of my neck, and it kept whispering that something had already started. That somewhere out there in the dark barns, in the warm animal breath and the rustle of straw, it was spreading. I must have dozed, because the pounding on my door felt like it came from inside a dream. Joseph! Get up! Reyes was screaming from the yard. Hurry! I have never thrown my clothes on so fast in my life. Seconds later I was crashing down the stairs and out into the dark of the farmyard. The floodlights were blazing at barns 1 and 2. People were already gathered outside, small and frightened in that hard white light. What happened? I ran up, panic crawling into my chest. Joseph, Reyes said, turning to me, and his face had no color left in it. This is bad. Finally. Caleb stepped out of the dark. Mr. Hale's older son. You're here. What happened? Go in and see for yourself, Caleb said grimly. I'm driving to town for the vet. I'll call the authorities, too. He left without another word, and the fact that Caleb Hale, who never rushed for anything, was rushing told me everything. I stepped into barn 1. Every cow was down. Every single one. They lay heaving on their sides, wheezing through clogged lungs, and their bodies were a map of those swollen, weeping sores. Not 3. Not 4. All of them. Every cow in that barn was sick. I swallowed, and I knew exactly what was coming. Scene, the vet. Caleb came back at sunrise with the veterinarian, a younger man named Dr. Whitley who I'd seen maybe twice before. Reyes, a few of the older hands, and I were guarding the barns by then. From that moment, nobody moved. No animals out. No people in. Quarantine. Whitley went into the barn with Caleb and came out fast. Too fast. Both of them had pulled on medical masks and rubber gloves. What's going on, Doc? Reyes asked. I don't know, Whitley said, and his voice was shaking. It might be anthrax. Or something like it. I honestly don't know. Anthrax. My stomach dropped. I can't say for sure. His eyes darted everywhere but at us. That would be my guess. But the animals are still alive. They're not showing the signs you'd expect. With anthrax they'd be gone by now, most of them. This is. I really don't know what this is. So what happens now? I said, looking between him and Caleb. Neither of them answered for a long moment. Caleb stood with his hands on his hips, staring off at nothing. Whitley kept stealing glances at Caleb, like he was hoping the man would make the decision for him. I've notified the authorities, the vet finally said. Until they get here. I think the kindest thing is to spare the animals any more suffering. And with that, he turned and walked away. Just walked away, and didn't look back. If this story is keeping you up, do me a favor and subscribe. We post new horror here every single night, and trust me, what came next on that farm is the part one still can't close my eyes without seeing. Seeing the culling, Caleb stood there a long time. I knew he was remembering the last time, the foot and mouth year. He'd have been about 16. He'd seen the piles. He'd smelled the smoke. Caleb. Reyes said softly. You heard the vet. Caleb didn't look at us. The USDA's been told. They'll show up when they show up. Go ahead and start. Please. I'll talk to my father. So it happened again, just like before. Medical mask on my face. Rubber gloves on my hands, thick work gloves over those. I carried the compressed air captive bolt gun from cow to cow, and Reyes worked beside me, and we did barn 2 together. The cows bellowed in pain as we moved among them. The stench of dying animals burned the inside of my nose, a smell like rot and copper and something sweeter underneath that I didn't have a name for. Their blistered bodies turned my stomach. I told myself this was mercy. I told myself it was the most bearable part of the whole horrible process, that what came after, the pits, the burning, would be worse. I stood over each one, looked at it one last time, and pulled the valve. Again. And again. And again. The blood soaked into the dry dirt. Blood and waste and filth, and me wading through all of it in rubber boots, going from one to the next, until my arms ached and my mind had gone somewhere quiet and gray and far away. Around noon a white SUV from the USDA crunched up the gravel drive. By then we were finished. I stood out on the porch smoking while Reyes went back through the barn making sure every animal was truly gone. Caleb and old Mr. Hale talked with the officials in their clean-pressed clothes. I knew exactly how it would go. They'd take samples. They'd speculate and argue. A state team would come to fence off the property and keep poking around. And the men who actually dug the pits and rolled the carcasses in, that would be me and the others. They'd just supervise. Point. Make sure it was all done by the book. The rest of that day was nothing but waiting and arguing. The officials walked the property in white hazmat suits. We regular hands were kept far back near the living quarters. Reyes chain-smoked and said nothing. Nobody said anything. The whole farm had gone quiet in a way that felt wrong, felt held breath, felt like the silence right before a storm cracks open. Scene, Duke comes home, Reyes. Joseph. Get over here, now. Someone was running from the little knot of men by the housing, waving his arms. For a second my brain wouldn't catch up, my head felt thick and foggy from the heat and the killing. Then I saw Duke, the big gray, snorting and stamping in the yard in front of the barns, and my mind snapped clean and sharp as ice. Duke and the rest of the healthy animals had already been moved to the far barn that morning, the one we'd kept clean. How in God's name had he gotten back here? I ran toward him, and raw panic poured into me, because as I got close I could see. He was sick. Thick ropes of saliva hung from his mouth. His eyes were red, bloodshot, rolling. And his coat, his beautiful gray coat, was broken out in those same swollen, weeping sores. Reyes? I stopped short. Reyes froze beside me, just stared at the horse, and took a long, slow pull from his cigarette like it was the only thing keeping him standing. He got loose, a young hand panted, running up. Broke right out of the far barn. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There was nothing to say. I was the one who shot Duke. Caleb couldn't do it. He brought the rifle out from his father's office and then just stood there beside the horse with his hands shaking so hard he couldn't have hit the broad side of the barn. Reyes couldn't either. So I took the rifle. The USDA people were saying not to let it suffer, and the protocols were already screaming euthanasia anyway. I put the barrel to that big gray skull, and I told him I was sorry, and I pulled the trigger. We dragged Duke into the barn with the others. And when they went to check the animals we'd moved to the far barn, the ones we'd been so sure were still healthy, every last one of them had the sores. The dogs. The cats. The pigs. The goats. The chickens. The horses. Every single creature on that farm was dying. So we put them all out of their misery. Because I couldn't let them suffer. Because someone had to do it. And there was no one else. Scene, the silent night, I barely slept that night. Everything I owned had been hosed down with disinfectant until I felt like a walking chemical drum. Nobody talked anymore. The hands didn't gather in their usual little groups to smoke and complain. A heavy, mournful silence had settled over the whole place like a wet wool blanket, smothering every sound. I lay in the dark and listened to that silence, and somewhere in the deepest part of the night, I realized what was wrong with it. It wasn't empty. A farm at night is never silent, there's always the shift of an animal, the cluck of a hen, a dog turning in its sleep, the soft sounds of 100 living things breathing in the dark. But there was none of that now. The silence wasn't peace. It was the silence of a held breath. It was the silence of something waiting. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was exhaustion, and the disinfectant, and 23 years of a job that had finally cracked something in me. I told myself a lot of things, lying there in the dark. I almost believed them. Scene, the morning everything ended, I woke at sunrise, the way I always do, my body waiting for the rooster. There was no crowing. I found him later in the barn, our old rooster, his neck twisted at an angle no living thing's neck should make. But that came later. First there was the silence, and the cool morning air with its faint bite, and the strange, terrible piece of a farm where nothing breathed but me. I stepped out into the yard. The light was thin and golden, the way it gets just after dawn. And out in that light, someone was moving. He was stumbling. Swaying like a drunk man on a pitching boat, lurching one direction then the other. Hey! I called. You okay? He turned toward me. His shirt hung open, unbuttoned, and his face was twisted into a grotesque mask of pain, lips peeled back, eyes wild. It was Travis. Old Mr. Hale's younger son. We hadn't seen him in days. To this day I don't know where he'd been, or where he came from that morning, or why. But it was the sores that stopped my heart. Reddish, yellow-tinged lesions, glowing wet beneath his open shirt. Spreading across his chest, his stomach, his throat. The same as the animals. Exactly the same. Joseph? Travis said, in a voice like a child's. What's happening to me? I started backing away. My mouth had gone dry as the dirt under my boots. And that's when I heard it, the thing that froze me solid. A cow. Bellowing. It came from the barns. From the barns where, the night before, I had personally made certain that every cow was dead. What in God's name? I whispered. The barn doors blew outward. I don't mean they swung open. I mean they exploded off their hinges, the massive wooden panels launching through the air like they weighed nothing. One sailed across the yard and smashed down onto the chicken coop, splintering it flat. The other, and I will see this until the day I die, came down on Travis where he stood, swatting him out of the world in a single instant. I couldn't move. My legs had locked. I stood there trembling as the impossible came crawling out into the morning sun. Seen, the thing from the barn, it was enormous. The size of a delivery truck, maybe bigger. It moved slowly at first, sluggishly, heaving itself forward through the broken doorway, and when it finally pulled fully into the light I felt my knees go to water and my vision narrow to a tunnel. The animals. All of them. Every creature I had killed and buried and dragged across that farm, they had fused together into one obscene, oozing mass, sliding forward like the contents of a grave that had decided to stand up and walk. Horse legs kicked uselessly from the bulk of it. Cow heads, 3, 4, 5 of them, swung on melted necks, eyes rolling, tongues lolling. Udders and limbs and split hooves all hung together in a slick of pus and blood, knitted through with the blistered, half-dissolved bodies of cats and dogs and pigs, their shapes still horribly recognizable. It breathed with a sound like a wet bellows. And it made a noise, God, the noise, it bellowed and barked and neighed and screamed all at once, a chorus of every animal I had murdered, coming out of one ruined throat. What the hell is that? Reyes was suddenly at my side, his voice cracking up into a register I'd never heard from a grown man. I don't know, I stammered. I don't know. People were pouring out into the yard now, drawn by the noise. Some were swearing. Some just stood there with their mouths open, staring at the slow, rolling lump of fused flesh as it dragged itself fully into the sunlight, glistening, steaming faintly in the cool air. And then it stopped. It seemed to notice us. The whole mass went still for one terrible heartbeat. Somewhere inside it, a hoarse head screamed. The dog parts began to bark, all of them at once, a frenzied wall of sound. And then it came at us. Seen, the rampage, it moved faster than anything that size has any right to move. It surged across the yard like a maddened bull, and everyone turned and ran, and it was pure, screaming, blinding chaos. The thing smashed through everything in its path. It crushed men beneath its bulk and then, I watched this, I will never not have watched this, it absorbed them, pulled their bodies up into its mass like a wave pulling sand back into the sea, folding them in along with the dirt and the gravel and the splintered wood. Dust rose in a choking cloud, full of the smell of pus and blood and panic, and you couldn't see anything, you could only hear the screaming and run. Joseph! Run! Reyes grabbed my arm and hauled me forward. Get out of here! The mass slid past us, close enough that I felt the wet heat of it brush my side, close enough that I felt one of those kicking horse legs graze my shoulder. And then Reyes's hand was torn from my arm. And Reyes was gone. I looked around in a daze. The thing was rolling after the others now, the cow head swinging back and forth, and now half-melted human arms and faces were fused into it too, waving obscenely from its sides as it moved, mouth still open. I ran. I threw myself through the front door of the main house and hit the floorboards and scrambled under the kitchen table like a child hiding from a thunderstorm. Dust and blood and filth caked my clothes. I curled into the smallest ball I could make of myself, clamped my hands over my ears, and shook. What would you have done? I have asked myself that question 10,000 times since, lying awake in the dark. What would you have done, run, or fight, or hide under a table like I did? I still wonder, to this day. Seen, under the table, but the sounds outside didn't fade. They got worse. Screams tore through the air, grown men shrieking in ways I didn't know a human throat could make. The cows bellowed like a stampede. The dogs barked and barked. The pigs squealed in rage and terror. And under all of it, the house itself began to shake. Wooden beams cracked overhead like gunshots. Plaster rained down on me. Out in the yard, sheets of barn metal clattered and shrieked and flew apart as if a tornado were grinding the whole farm to powder. The roof groaned, and then a whole section of it came down with a roar somewhere in the next room. I pressed my hands so hard against my ears that they ached. I wanted to scream and nothing came out. My throat had closed up tight as a fist. I don't know how long it went on. Hours. The light under the table went from gold to white to a long, slow amber. I stayed there while the world ended above me, while the thing made of everything I'd killed tore the only home I'd known for 23 years into kindling. I stayed there and I prayed to a God I wasn't sure was listening, and I waited. And then, sometime toward evening, it stopped. Scene, after, the pounding stopped. The screaming stopped. A dead, suffocating silence settled over the farm, heavier than anything I'd ever felt, a silence with weight, a silence that pressed down on my chest. The sun was barely glowing red on the horizon when I finally crawled out from under the table. Half the house was gone. The whole living room had collapsed into a heap of broken beams and shattered glass. If I'd hidden in there instead of the kitchen, they'd have found me under all of it. If they ever bothered to look. I climbed out through the ruins and into the yard, coughing on the dust that still hung in the dying light. And what I saw stopped me where I stood. It looked like the aftermath of a war. The barns were gone, not collapsed, gone, their boards and beams flung across the property in long scattered ribbons. Pieces of the dead, animal and human both, stained the gravel dark red. The dusty ground was torn and churned and filthy from one fence line to the other. Caleb stood alone in the middle of it all. I walked toward him, and when I saw his face I stopped. There was nothing in it. No fear, no grief, no recognition. His mind had gone somewhere very far away, somewhere I don't think he ever fully came back from. He just stared through me at the wreckage of everything his family had built. In the distance, headlights cut across the darkening fields, bouncing up the gravel drive. Animal control, maybe. Or the state team, finally arriving. Or something else, I've never been sure who they were, the men who came that night, or what agency would send people in unmarked trucks to a place like that. But whatever they came for was already gone. There was no trace of the mass. No body. No remains. No great pile of fused flesh sitting in the yard for them to sample and tag and argue over. It had simply moved on, out into the dark fields and the wide world beyond, and it had left nothing behind but the devastation. Nothing but the silence, and the red gravel, and Caleb standing in the middle of it with his empty eyes. Scene, reflection, they told us, later, that it was a disease. A bad one, something exotic, something that got into the herd and turned aggressive. They had a name for it, some long Latin string of syllables, and a report with our farm's name redacted out of it, and a settlement, and forms to sign. I signed them. What else was I going to do? You can't put what I saw into a form. There's no box to check for a thing made of everything you killed, rising up out of a barn to take it all back. I've thought about it every night for years now. About the sores that pulsed like something underneath was breathing. About how the animals backed against the walls in fear, days before any of it made sense, as if they could already feel it coming, as if they knew. And I've come to believe something I can't prove and wouldn't say out loud to anyone who hadn't been there. We didn't cause it. But we fed it. Every cow I put down, every horse, every dog and cat and pig, I told myself it was mercy, and maybe it was. But mercy and murder leave the same body on the ground. And I think, up on that hill where I buried so many of them over so many years, in the cold patient dark under the dirt, something had been keeping count. I left farming after that. I live in a small apartment now, in a town with no animals, no barns, no hills. I sleep with the lights on. And on quiet nights, when the silence gets too heavy and presses down on my chest, I sometimes think I hear it, far off, carried on the wind, a sound that is a cow and a dog and a horse and a man all bellowing at once. Coming closer. I tell myself it's just a dream. I almost believe it. Subscribe for more horror every single night. And if you want more stories that will keep you up, check out What the Wow Stories for the wildest relationship drama you've ever heard. Link below. Sleep well.